Well, welcome. Welcome to our conversation today with Melanie. Thank you so much for joining us. And Melanie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us more about you?
Thank you so much for having me, Dawn. I'm excited to be here. I am currently the Senior Vice President for Communications and Culture at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Um, in that role, I manage our media relations, digital content and campaigns, and brand and culture teams. The brand and culture team is multifunctional. We do brand product projects, marketing, creative development, video production, corporate and arts and entertainment engagement and partnerships, and editorial review. Our editorial team helps manage our voice and our tone of voice. The media relations team does advocacy and healthcare, and education, communications, booking. We also have someone on the team who supports our Planned Parenthood Global. And our digital content and campaigns work cross-functionally with our organizing team and our development team on supporter engagement and social media promotion, and also the content on our website. So we have a good group of different types of communicators, who are brought together to drive communication strategy for Planned Parenthood.
That's really great. That's amazing. Yeah, the amount of depth and team you have is fantastic. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your career. How did you get here? How did you rise to this career?
That's a good question, because I was a journalism major, a broadcast journalism major, and I have never worked in journalism. I I had wanted to be a TV reporter since I was like in sixth grade. I used to write news articles on Post-it notes, like little short TV, and read them in the mirror. I was really committed to this, and I got to college. I happened to go to college in Florida A&M University sits on the highest of 7 hills in Tallahassee, Florida. And I was in Tallahassee during the 2000 election.
Interesting.
Which changed the trajectory of my life. There was a recount that lasted several weeks, and lots of activism around the recount, including on my campus. And I was the comms director for student government at the time. Nerd alert. And I came into contact with a lot of members of Congress and their staff who said, there's this internship program that you should try. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation summer internship. I did take their advice. I applied. I came to Washington, and I've basically been here ever since. I've spent most of my career in government. I worked on the Hill right after college in the office that I interned in. So my internship translated into a job after college. And it was for my hometown congressman. So I'm originally from New Orleans, but I also grew up in Selma, Alabama, and Tuskegee, Alabama. So I think it is that time in Alabama that also shaped part of the activism that I have sought in my career. But I worked in New Orleans as a public information officer for the DA's office in New Orleans. I came back to Washington as communications director for that congressman that hired me right out of college. And then I went on to be comms director for the House Judiciary Committee under Chairman John Conyers, who passed away last year. And then I went to work on the Obama campaign. I went in the general. I was the Southern Regional Communications Director on the Obama campaign in 2008. We won all 3 of my battleground states. I take full credit for that. And then I went to work in the Obama administration, which I had come to Washington basically the beginning of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
During the war, actually, my internship. No, it was my first job on the Hill was when they had the vote on the war, on the Iraq War, and that came back in 2004. So I worked mostly during the Bush years. I didn't have a good sense of the work that could be done in the executive branch. I started at HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I left to work on the 2012 campaign at the DNC. I came back to HUD as Assistant Secretary for Housing and Urban Development. I left there when the HUD Secretary became Director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, and I worked in the White House with him for a year and as part of the White House communications team. And then I left there to be Director of Public Affairs at the Justice Department, working with Attorney General Loretta Lynch. And I was in that role until the day before inauguration.
Yeah.
But I was on maternity leave for the last 3 months of the administration because my child was born in 2016. And then I worked at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund before coming to Planned Parenthood. So a lot of government work. I believe in government. I love government. I believe that if you want to solve problems, get involved in your government. If you don't believe in your government, get involved in activist nonprofit organizations so that you can once again find your way back into government.
Exactly. So you can do what's happening. Yeah. Absolutely. That is fantastic. That is what an amazing career, and be able to make such an imprint. Yeah, that's fantastic. Great. So 2020 rolls around, January, we're like, oh, it's Australian fires, real bad.
I forgot about the Australian fires.
And they are real bad. It's really bad.
They were really bad.
Really bad. But March rolls around and we have a different story. So tell us about you've had, obviously, working in government, you deal with a lot of crisis throughout your career. So tell us about 2020. What has it been like for you and your role? And
So I have dealt with a lot of crisis in my career.
Yeah.
My hometown congressman that I got my first, second, and third jobs out of college from, you may have heard of him. His name is William Jefferson. He went to prison. He was accused of having $90,000 in his freezer. I was his communications director at the time that investigation launched. They raided his home in Washington and New Orleans, and then 3 weeks later, Hurricane Katrina happened.
Yes.
When I was in the DA's office, my very first press job, Jamie Foxx was filming the movie Ray. That's how old I am. And got into a fight in a casino, and that was a thing.
Yeah.
When I was at the Department of Justice, we had Paris, Brussels, Orlando terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
Shootings in movie theaters.
Mm-hmm.
Charleston. The Charleston 9 happened the week before I started at DOJ.
Wow.
There were a rash of shootings and vicious attacks. It was also right after Ferguson in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So we're also doing a lot of police accountability work. I have done a lot of crisis work in my career. That's the point. When I started at Planned Parenthood, I had a colleague who every day would say, "Is it too exciting for you? Planned Parenthood's a crisis place." And one day I was like, dude, I literally in my last job had like 5 terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
I got this. That was, words that I have been eating all year. I've never felt more overwhelmed by crisis in my career as I have this year. Just, it's the crisis you can't imagine that impacts every part of your life.
Yes.
And that's really what this pandemic has been. I have a 3.5-year-old son. He's very active. He is very smart. He is very loud and very busy. And we took him out of daycare when everything went into lockdown. March 13th was the last day I was at work, and it was the last day he saw his friends. The week before that, March 4th, we were at the Supreme Court for a rally around June medical services. That's when the oral arguments were taking place. We were preparing for Trump v. Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court case around birth control, insurance providers covering birth control. We were waiting for those oral arguments, and I don't remember everything that we've seen come down the pipeline, honestly. The immediate aftermath, our affiliates, like every other healthcare organization in the country and healthcare provider in the country, saw an immediate slowdown in patient volume, and we're also trying to figure out how to safely provide care. There were lots of questions, lots of fear about going to doctors' offices and providing healthcare in the early weeks. Then some states took it a step further, that if we were going to cut down on the people coming into healthcare services, then we were going to eliminate some services, no elective surgeries, including abortion. 9 states said there would be no abortions during the shutdown, and the state of Texas took it further and said not even medication abortion.
Wow.
So we had 9 lawsuits in response, and we got injunctions in every single one of them, but that was a lot of work. We had several affiliates who applied for funding from the SBA through the PPP loan program, and the administration decided that Planned Parenthood specifically did not qualify, even though each affiliate decided themselves, but with counsel, whether they were qualified for the program. There's no language that anyone has seen that separates Planned Parenthood in any way from other national organizations with chapters or affiliates across the country. And so we stood up a 50-state telehealth program in weeks. We were not offering telehealth, and my team stood up a multi-million-dollar awareness campaign of the telehealth offering to provide the air cover for affiliates who aren't able to, when you're making decisions on how to provide care, you can't promote your services in the way that you might have. And so helping to provide them air cover and promote the new telehealth offering that existed across the country. And we're continuing that telehealth awareness campaign. We also, in this time, it's not a crisis, but we made we had a couple of big proactive announcements. We endorsed Joe Biden for president. Mm-hmm. And several days later, we announced that Alexis McGill Johnson would be the permanent president of Planned Parenthood. So it has been an action-packed summer. Yeah. And the action, the maintenance of sanity in the summer, I know is a challenge for everybody.
Yeah.
But certainly a challenge. And most of my friends were saying their work slowed down. Mine picked up tenfold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating thing. It's a have and have nots. And I think that's the hardest thing about this is it's extremes, right? It's like one way or the other. Like nobody's just like, it's cool. Like, no. Like either, it's, and I think we're all keeping a demon at the gate, right? Like everybody has something that wants to get in, which is really fascinating. So you've had this kind of ever revolving door of crisis, and I think a lot of the trends have touched your organization too. Everything from Black Lives Matter to, toxic work cultures have kind of hurt some of the affiliates, that it's constant. And,
I didn't even name all of the things that had happened. That's right.
I don't have time. I think so. Yeah. What are your biggest lessons? Like, what are some of the things that what are your biggest lessons of really the last 4 months? Like, how has this kind of shaped your future self?
I have prioritized my own care in a way that I haven't done in a very long time.
Yeah.
Because the only way that I'm going to be able to show up and work at the level that this moment requires of me is if I am taking care of myself. So whatever that means, lately it means Saturday night candlelight baths.
Yeah.
Which this past Saturday I got out of that bath to do a very angry tweet storm about a New York Times op-ed that published while I was in the tub. But I think the self-care for me, that is how I manage. I think for as a communicator, managing, I thought about this recently. I wrote my master's thesis. I got my master's degree from American University in public communication, and I wrote my master's thesis about ongoing hostile crisis.
Oh, wow.
And it was a case study of Walmart. And it was before Twitter, so none of the findings apply anymore. And I don't think any conventional wisdom at all applies. So whatever we think is going to happen, the opposite is going to happen all the time. That is another thing I've learned in the last 4 years.
Yes.
But as a communicator, understanding the brand and understanding the values of your organization and the brand of your organization is critical. And so we were able to stand up this telehealth awareness campaign with insights from research we had done on our brand and on our audiences and how they, and it's something we do periodically, but it really drives our communication strategy and how we are able to be authentic in responding to crisis moments too. I think we saw in the early weeks after COVID, brands completely changing their advertising strategy, completely changing because people at home we're experiencing something different. Everyone is in a different place. And in the ability to turn on a dime like that often depends on a deep understanding of who you are as a brand and who your organization is, what values you hold, and how audiences see you and receive the information that you're giving them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, this can be that grace of space and time that if you have felt a slowdown in kind of your program support, that this is the time to delve deep and get to know your audience even better. I think, if you're not on fire, that's
right. That's right.
That you can kind of use that space also. So yes, self-care is critical in 2020. It was, I think it's also something that we recognize too, in kind of a high stress job of, yes, you have to maintain your own sanity or else you're not going to be there for anybody else. It's very much put your own air mask on first, right? And that's crisis. And I think that's what crisis folks we all know, right? And I think, and for the first 6 weeks, I was definitely in good crisis mode. I was like, it's fine. This is a crisis. I've done this before. But then it gets longer, and you need to find other things. So self-care. So I mean, how you have a kid at home. How are you managing? What are some of your tips on?
So I had gained a lot of weight last year and was almost at my pregnancy weight.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I started working out and eating. I changed my eating habits at the beginning of this year, but I hadn't incorporated daily exercise. And maybe and I don't want to be this person, but I'm going to be this person. I had downloaded the Peloton app.
Okay. Yes.
Before we went into quarantine. I know Peloton people have gotten quite obnoxious in quarantine, but I do not have a Peloton, but I did download the app because there was one in the gym at the office. I only used it once, but I had the app on my phone, and I started running, and my knees were like, girl, we can't do that anymore. So I started doing the other workouts, and now I rent a spin bike. It's not a Peloton, but I rent a spin bike. I still use the app on my phone, and I work out almost every day. And sometimes I work out in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Because I'm at home.
Yeah.
I wear workout clothes every day. And so I don't have to change, and I can do it really quickly. And the app has like 10, 15-minute workouts.
Oh, cool.
I don't have to do a lot, but it creates these mental breaks where if I feel anxiety building up, I can do something with it. I meditate more. I do yoga. I never did any of that, but I've got to be able to slow myself down. Because the other thing is, it's not necessarily work. That work is stressful and it's busy and it can be overwhelming. It certainly has been overwhelming, but the time we live in is scary.
Yeah.
It's and to have a child in this time, we still don't know if he's going to school, what that would look like. I have asthma.
Yeah.
I'm scared for my own health. My mother is 81 years old and has COPD.
Wow.
And I haven't seen her. These are scary times. So that alone is anxiety creating.
Yeah.
Then there's work. Then there's parenting, and there's trying to make sure I think my child has shown signs of depression. Today, we were on a walk this morning, and he said, "Mommy, my friends don't want to play with me anymore." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "My friends from school." And I said, "No, they do want to play with you, kid. We just can't see them at school." But you see that he sees them, they have virtual care, so he sees them online. He said, "But I miss playing with them." That, trying to keep him happy, all of those things individually would drive anxiety up. And so I have had to, and I'm open to new suggestions if anybody has any on stress management and self-care, because I think the best thing that can come out of this is that we are all better at taking care of ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah, that's something I've done too is the 15-20 minute workouts. It's like the first thing I do after we have a morning meeting with our kid and my husband, and then it's 15-20 minutes, and then I know I've done something for myself, so I can do something for everybody else, which is also something that's really interesting. Yeah. So I mean, do you have any other tips about how to make it fit, how to make self-care fit in? It sounds so bubble baths are good. So that ritual of also kind of setting up rituals and, making space for it is probably the biggest tip. Do you have any other tips about how to make it all fit within those 24 hours a day?
So sometimes I walk a lot.
Yeah.
I do walking meetings.
Yeah.
And everybody just has to figure it out. And I'll get on video and I'll just hold my phone up and walk around. I do that for two reasons. One, I think it's important to model healthy tips.
Yes.
So it's important for people to see me walking during a meeting so they know that it's okay. Wherever you need to take this meeting, do that. Yep. And two, because some days I don't have time in the middle of the day, but I need to get up from this chair and go outside because I don't have my daily commute. I don't have, daycare drop off. I'm not walking. I used to go for walks during lunch. I'm not doing any of that. I have got to get outside. And that also helps. So even on days where I am in meetings from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., creating that time outside during a meeting has been really clutch for me.
Absolutely. Great. So you're having more control, over our work life, because I think that's interesting thing about this virtual environment is that, you do. There's a lot changing what working means for a lot of people, right? Like, what you're wearing is not as important, that being at your desk.
I dressed up for y'all today.
I know, it's nice. I like it.
Thank you.
But also having more control of your work environment is also about being at the leadership table. And I think often, and especially in times of crisis, and that communications is often not included, that development's there, that it's just this really tight relationship. So it's really important that communicators gain more space in that leadership table and kind of elbow their way in. If your organization is really making decisions about about its future without you, that's something that is a problem for nonprofits for sure. So, how do you think that communications professionals can gain more power within their organizations and kind of gain more of that leadership decision making? Because I do think that with everything being shut down, that communications is key, right? It's the difference of an organization surviving or thriving, because we're the storytellers, we're the people who are telling the story of what's happening behind the scenes, behind the shut doors. So how do you think that, what's your big, career advice about how to get more leadership?
Yeah, this is it exists everywhere in every industry. People are brought into decisions after they've been made to clean them up.
Yep.
And that is a constant, that's a constant challenge. One thing that I think people do understand or can understand is, and you'll hear me talk about brand a lot, I am a traditional media relations professional. So I've spent my career doing PR. But brand management is a business function that business leaders understand. And it also, it is foundational to organizational strategy. It is not, there should be someone who is focused on it, but it's everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely.
And being able to draw that connection between, talking to, especially in a world where people are getting information in so many different ways.
Yes.
You cannot manage brand perception with media relations only. You have to have a social strategy. Your development team needs to be in lockstep with your communications and your digital strategy, because all of those ways in which people are getting information from and about the organization need to be coordinated.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about it, I think communicators need some reputation management, some brand management.
Yeah.
This is a running joke that my team and I have. We need to fix our own brand, and this exists it exists everywhere. It's not unique to us, because people will put communications in a box.
Yep.
It's here's the decision we made, go write a press release about it. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
And I have that conversation going into jobs. How do you, person who is hiring me, view communications in your organizational structure? And if they say, I think press releases are really important, that's a red flag for me. Because you have to be able to, you have to be part of the decision-making strategy, of the decision-making and strategy building process, so that you're not relegated to the cleanup team.
Absolutely. And I think it is about emphasizing, and I think it's about frank conversations with your leadership of that I can do my job better if I'm at the table when the decision is made and when the sausage is being made, not when it's coming out. Especially now that image management, brand management, all of these things, perception management about the viability of your organization is all about communications. It's all about how you're talking about what you do, the amount of posts you're doing, how you're talking about program development and program deployment, that all this stuff is really important. And that, to really fight and to work and to show up at those meetings is really, really important. And I think that, and as, the rough road ahead, that communications is really about, being able to save, or really, could be detrimental to organizations if it's not expressed well.
That's right.
Right? Like, it's tough, and it's a tough thing. And I think having those conversations now, before you have to make those big asks, kind of desperate asks, is really important. Have you ever kind of worked your way into a leadership meeting, and do you have any tips about that, or is it always just yours was there from the start?
No, I've been known for showing up uninvited. It's a lot harder to do virtually.
Yeah.
But I've had my fair share of, hey, I know I wasn't invited, but I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moments in my career. I will say in my younger years, I was a lot more reckless as a professional, in how I engaged, but it served me well. I don't know if I would advise or recommend some of my wilder tactics, but I, early on in my tenure in government, in the executive branch, I certainly I didn't know the leadership team. I was getting to know them. I was the number 2 in the comms office, but I had an expertise and a knowledge base that other people didn't have because I had worked on the Hill.
Yeah.
And so I came to conversations with a different lens of strategy, because in the executive branch, you have oversight from the legislative branch. So Congress cares a lot about what you're doing all the time, or they used to. I won't talk about what's happening today, but that's how it used to go back in the olden days of balanced government. Anyway, so I brought a lens to the conversation, that people come from all walks of life. A lot of people had never worked in government before, or hadn't worked in different branches of government and didn't have that lens. And so I think it's important, if you are going to get a seat at the table, to also know what you bring to the conversation that is unique. Mm-hmm. It may not just be comm strategy, but it may be political strategy, or marketing advice, or some communicators are also lawyers. You may have some legal guidance. Whatever it is that you uniquely hold and will bring to the conversation, and always try to have some value add.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to just be in the conversation or just to be present. Absolutely. You have to be adding value, or else it's not likely to shift the position of the communications work in the organization.
Certainly. Yeah. And I think, and even having, the best pulse on what your audience is responding to, right? Like, what people like in social and media and all those things, what people are responding to, what messages are working. And even having that depth could be really helpful of kind of shooing your way. Yeah. Putting your foot in the door and getting through it's like, well, I know what people are responding to, and development.
And knowing who the audience is.
Yes.
Too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Development might feel that they do with the, top folks that they talk to, but yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So what's your one word to sum up the remainder of 2020? What do you think we're halfway through, what's your forecast for the rest of the year?
If I've learned anything this year, it is to not try to forecast the future, because it's unpredictable. I saw somebody posted yesterday on Twitter a video. I think it was from Wired, or not a video, but an article, how to outrun a dinosaur. And the tweet was, with the way 2020 is going, this might be valuable information. I don't know what's happening this year. And I don't want to predict it. So the only thing I will say is take care of yourself. Yeah. I think living past 2020 is probably the only goal I have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's, yeah, absolutely. And it's, be prepared, man. Like, yeah. And just be flexible. And but yeah, it's an interesting year. I agree. Yeah, it's so hard to predict. Like, there's just all of it. Like, yeah. It's so funny. Things like in March, right? Like, oh, it'll be blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
3 weeks ago, we were engaged in a battle with Kanye West. That happened on the same day of a Supreme Court case. And we got more mentions for Kanye West than for the Supreme Court case.
So there you go.
I know you could not have paid me to predict that would have happened. And for that reason, I don't predict anything.
Yes, yeah.
There were killer hornets this year.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, murder hornets. Who
knows?
Out to get us. I know. Anything you want to share before I open it up for people to ask questions?
No, I think we've covered a lot, and I would love to hear from the folks on the call.
Great. So I have the chat open. You are also welcome to unmute yourself or unmute your video and chat live. But yeah, so we have, just doing a time check. Yeah, we have about 20 minutes. Wow, that was pretty good. To kind of ask your questions and or share your stories or whatever you need to do in this space.
Hi. I'm Jeanette Stokes. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and I wanted to start with a compliment that may go to you or may go to your predecessor. There's a woman who coaches people on communications in North Carolina named Kivy LaRue Miller, who wrote a lot about the conflict, I guess we could call it a conflict, between Susan Komen Foundation and Planned Parenthood. I think that was more than 3 years ago.
That was a predecessor of mine, and I also don't remember which one.
It doesn't matter.
But that predated me.
Right. So Kivy's point around that.
It's a really good case study, though.
Yes, was that Planned Parenthood was brilliant and Susan Komen was sound asleep. So that Planned Parenthood put up a special fundraising campaign almost immediately after they were threatened, and I guess eventually the Komen money was taken from them. And Susan Komen didn't respond one way or another. So it was a completely missed moment. Not to explain, not to say, gee, we're sorry, but this is the decision, nothing, So like 3 days went by where Planned Parenthood had the communications field all to themselves, and I think used it wisely. As I recall, money poured in. So communications are sometimes, always, I guess, tied to fundraising. My question is, what did it feel like to inherit a job from in an organization that had something of a good track record? And is that an anomaly, or is that part of the tradition that you inherited when you started working there?
So that's an interesting question. I certainly inherited a good track record. One thing that happened last year in 2019, so I was hired by the previous president, Dr. Lena Wen, who was president for about 8 months total, and I worked with her for about 6 months. So we had a very strong communications track record under the 12 years that Cecile Richards was president. The 2019 was rocky for many reasons. There were extreme abortion bans being passed in state legislatures across the country. We were perhaps less aggressive than we had been in the past in managing comms around that. We got our footing sometime around the summer, and then had a presidential transition and a new interim president. And so I inherited a comms program with a very good track record, with uncertain leadership at the helm of the organization. And that, I think, has been pretty difficult, and was difficult. We've had we had a lot of staff turnover, and so the sort of the actual managing of personnel through leadership uncertainty is difficult as well. What I will say is that I think only we noticed that it was difficult. I mean, there were certainly stories about the leadership transition, and there were stories about whether or not Planned Parenthood could still be the powerhouse that it has been on the advocacy side. But I think to our supporters, our brand has been pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is because we always focus on our brand. And so even through tumultuous, rocky times, what people are getting, the story and the narrative that people see coming from us has continued to be consistent. I think there's definitely value in having a team that has a good communications track record, and having folks who have done hard things and been through hard things. It's also good to have people who've been through hard things in other places, to have a fresh set of eyes. So I think that's what I brought to the team. But we have incredible talent on the team at Planned Parenthood that I am blessed to work with.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions? You can chat, drop in the chat box if you're shy, or pop in. We're all used to video. Go.
I know we're used to it, but it still feels very shameless. So hi, my name is Emily Gaylord. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm coming in from Western Massachusetts, and I work for a very pragmatic, science-based environmental nonprofit. So still a nonprofit, but quite different from Planned Parenthood in terms of branding and messaging. However, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, if you had told me when the pandemic started that was not going to be the hardest thing to navigate in 2020, I would have said that that's impossible. This is totally new territory. But as it turns out, as a science-based organization, talking about a pandemic is actually pretty easy for us. You know, we adjusted the things we do to be virtual, and we figured out how to connect with people still, how to get funding, and that was fine. And then, of course, this second pandemic was kind of unveiled. I won't say it's been there this whole time, around racism and the events of June. And I think we're really wrestling now with how to tread into a space that's new to us, but really important. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on brand alignment as the national conversation is changing.
Well, so the good thing is there's lots of good science around racism and racial bias and how it impacts the environment, healthcare. There's sort of a good synergy. And my current boss, the president, Alexis McGill Johnson, I like to sing her praises all the time. And I'm not like one of those people who does that for every boss. I just really believe she's amazing. She, prior to coming to Planned Parenthood, founded an organization called the Perception Institute. She's a political scientist by trade and has done a lot of research and science around racial bias and how and implicit bias and how that impacts workplaces. And so she brings a unique lens, but I name that to say there are organizations like the Perception Institute that are designed to help organizations not only think about how they manage staff in this moment and interact and become more diverse and more inclusive, but also how they show up broadly, and how and they do it with science and research. And they're not the only organization, but it's top of mind because of my boss, who she and I had previously worked together when I was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and she was head of Perception Institute on the Starbucks racial bias training initiative, which was a thing that happened that people don't remember because so much has happened since then.
Great advice, because it's just, we're doing a lot of internal focus right now, which I think everyone's doing, or everyone should be doing. But also just that advice of, if we're used to following the science, I mean, this isn't going to be the last national conversation that switches things up, and it's 2020. So next week, who knows what it's going to be.
That's right.
That's really good advice, to just continue to follow the science, and then we can kind of stay true to our core, which I think is important.
Absolutely.
And I think it's also one thing that might be interesting is, I don't know what kind of science your organization focuses on, but there are lots of gaps in science where that are filled with assumptions about people of color and Black people in particular, where I think uncovering and shining a light on the institutional racism in science itself, I think could be really helpful and valuable.
Yeah, we're focused on energy efficiency and waste reduction, so it's pretty as dry as it gets. But I think that some of those topics actually affect the most people.
Yeah.
So,
but how we get rid of, a lot of people get rid of waste by dumping in Black neighborhoods, for example.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So there are always connections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to watch the ripple across science and conservation organizations from the event in June, and yes, it's been very good. A lot of good reckoning around that, and that I think kind of looking to other organizations and kind of seeing what they're doing, like kind of the organizations you look up to, and see what are the things you're not doing, and making sure they're saying all the right things.
It's certainly never been easier. I feel like everyone's been led to water, and it's our responsibility to drink at this point.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you. Okay, what else we got?
Don't be shy.
I know.
Well, since nobody has any questions, I will. I didn't even mention the work that we are doing in today's crisis du jour around our founder, Margaret Sanger. In the last, today is Tuesday, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. In the last 5 days, I've seen almost as many op-eds from anti-abortion activists about the founder of Planned Parenthood being a racist and a eugenicist, and how denouncing her name isn't enough, that Planned Parenthood is committing Black genocide because more health centers sit in Black neighborhoods. So first of all, nobody fact checks these opinion pieces. Only 4% of our health centers sit in majority Black neighborhoods. That's a fact.
Yeah.
And these op-eds ran in USA Today, the New York Times, Newsweek, the Wall Street Journal, and then every hour there's one in on a conservative news site. But those are the national pieces that I've seen. Margaret Sanger said some things that were bad, and that is also a fact. She aligned herself with the KKK. She also aligned herself with W.E.B. Du Bois and other Black leaders of her time. Her goal was to promote birth control, however she could do that. There's a very good piece, I'll share it in the chat, from Rewire about Margaret Sanger's history, and it is how we have tried to, we've been pointing people in this direction, along with we've been pointing people to it along with writing letters to the editor to respond. But Planned Parenthood certainly has its own institutional racism to deal with, which we've talked about publicly in the last few weeks. There are, the current president is a Black woman. I'm a Black woman. We have, our national office has a majority minority board. Our affiliate leadership, our affiliated organizations, the leadership looks different. And as we saw with what happened in Planned Parenthood Greater New York, if you haven't seen, there was staff complaints about the CEO that were made public and reported publicly. And they called on her to resign. She did. This is happening across industries, organizations. It's happening everywhere. What we have sought to do in this moment is to be authentic about the work that happens and that needs to happen, and to actually do it. Yeah. We happen to have an expert at the helm who can help drive that internal work that we need to do. We've made public statements to set the bar high for what we hope to accomplish, and then we have to do the work to accomplish it. But the Margaret Sanger story is complicated. Her legacy is complicated. Yeah. She is the founder of Planned Parenthood, but she, not just racist things, but ableist things, and called for, suggested that morons shouldn't be born, for example. The ableist things she said weren't necessarily about race, but a lot of people believed that to mean Black people. She never explicitly said Black people shouldn't be born. That said, she was a champion for birth control, which was radical in the time in which she lived. Yeah. And she aligned herself with bad people out of political expediency. Helping people to understand that is complicated. But when people say that Planned Parenthood commits Black genocide, they remove the agency of Black women to make our own decisions about our bodies. Planned Parenthood is not doing this to Black women. In the New York Times piece, I stopped at a statement that after Roe, minority birth rates decreased. That it proves nothing other than Black women hadn't had control over our own reproductive lives, going back to when we were brought here in slavery and used as breeding machines to breed more slaves, especially after the transatlantic slave trade ended. And so assuming that Planned Parenthood is committing Black genocide, or asserting that Planned Parenthood is committing Black genocide, removes all agency. It infantilizes Black women, and is harmful, dangerous, and racist itself. Yeah. It's dangerous because we're in a moment where it's hard to trust information. And I think that's another thing that everybody is dealing with. All communicators are dealing with. What is truth and how do you convey truth? Yeah. This is a big problem in the science industry. And so, we have a problem that we're working through and developing our brand strategy around our founder and responding to these pieces as they come, and aligning with our affiliates as they make decisions about how to manage Margaret Sanger's name. The one thing people don't know is that our affiliates are all independent 501c3 and some C4 organizations with their own independent CEOs and boards. They manage their properties, they manage their development, they manage their staff. We work in service of the work that they do, but we don't direct them in that way. That's also a communications challenge.
Yeah. I think the founder, there's a lot in that comment. Thank you for that. Thank you for that transparency too, I think. The founder branding, I think, is something that all of us should be looking at and really understanding where your founder coming from, or your founding story, and making sure that there's not a deeper story to tell or a way to step aside from it in a way that makes sense for your organization. Sierra Club did a really great job last week of dealing with this issue. That's a huge issue, and they're working through it, and I think it's interesting. So it's interesting to look at that, and I think it is something to everybody take a check, is look at your founders. See what the story is.
Princeton also did a good job with us. My colleague is VP of Comms at Princeton, so shout out to my friend. But on this question about communications around toxic workplaces and harassment allegations, this is something we also obviously have dealt with and are continuing to deal with, because we support the affiliates. But again, we don't even hire the CEOs. We don't have any. We also cannot fire a CEO of an affiliate. So we can guide them on messaging around this to ensure that employees' voices are heard. But what I have said to my colleagues is that there is no communications plan that will solve bad management. We are not magicians. We can't like, if there is a Paula, you're trying to get me. That is correct. There were lots of stories last year about the previous president of Planned Parenthood and management challenges. And there, again, is no communication strategy that will fix that. That is up to, and that is something that is worth conversations with boards and board chairs, that employee voices should be heard. Employees should be part of hiring processes to ensure, how someone presents themselves to a board is very different from how they might present to an employee who will have to experience that management. And having employee voices be part of the process, part of the hiring process, helps provide that accountability along the way. Listening to employees, responding to employees, whether someone is going to be humble and transparent or performative. And I think the challenge in organizational management is that in order to really create change, you need someone who is willing and open to admit fault, to be vulnerable, and you can still be decisive, you can still be strong, you can still be assertive, but if you are unwilling to acknowledge that your staff is all white, except for that one black person you hired to say that you had a black person, or unwilling to acknowledge that you have kept that one black person out of critical conversations to their job because you thought they were unprofessional, or there are like lots of things, and there's just not anything a communication strategy can do there. And the best communication strategy involves leadership change. The best way to move forward out of that crisis that comes up when employees are complaining about a staff is to make a leadership change. And that is not a communication strategy. That is a board decision. But in the instance of if people want to draw it out and extend in the era of Twitter, cancel culture, which is a term I hate, but in this time, short of leadership change, nothing's going to get you out of that crisis cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today. So yeah, I mean, so we originally invited, this was great. This was great. Good planning was, beginning of the year, end of last year. We're like, oh, what's the biggest story? Oh, definitely Planned Parenthood abortion laws in summer of 2019. But I mean, how amazing is it that,
look how time has changed.
Yeah, and how you were truly the right person to talk to about, because you've had every flavor of crisis of this, like, flavor has touched your organization. So I am sorry that has happened to you, but also thankful that you're here to share that knowledge with people, and that you're still strong and an amazing professional. So thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your insights today. It was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Dawn. And anytime you want me back, I'm here.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for everybody jumping in.
Thank you, Joy.
Saying hi. And, yeah, have a great afternoon. Bye, y'all.
Bye.